Something about this Netflix Diddy documentary hasn't been sitting right with viewers. And it's not because people didn't learn anything. It's not because the production felt rushed. And it's not because the subject matter wasn't serious enough. It's because the documentary feels careful, especially at the exact moments when the story starts brushing up against broader industry connections. A lot of people walked away with the same uneasy reaction. This feels edited, but not for time. The pacing is smooth. The visuals are clean. The narrative is clear. Yet the closer the story gets to uncomfortable territory, the more the tone shifts. Certain names fade out. Certain connections are mentioned briefly and then dropped. And suddenly, what's framed as a reckoning starts to feel more like a controlled version of events. That's where the conversation really begins. Because when a documentary is promoted as a deep look into power, influence, and culture, viewers naturally expect it to go all the way. And when it doesn't, people start asking why. This isn't about accusing anyone of anything. This isn't about turning gossip into facts. This is about understanding how stories get shaped when power, money, and risk are involved. And that's why Katt Williams' name keeps coming back into the conversation. Months before this documentary dropped, Katt made comments that, at the time, sounded provocative, but vague. He talked about truth, he talked about lies, and most importantly, he talked about how the truth doesn't land evenly in the entertainment industry. He didn't say everyone would be exposed. He said some people would be handled lightly. At the time, people treated it like classic Katt: bold talk, uncomfortable energy, and sharp humor. But once the documentary aired, a lot of viewers started revisiting those comments with fresh eyes.
Nobody's ever talked to her, and she's never been interviewed anywhere. And now, understand, I'm not talking about one person. What I just told you applies to 7 people. How they all end up with that. That's part of what you get. I came in this business saying I was going to expose. When I talked about Michael Jackson, when I talked about R. Kelly, they canceled me for these things because why would you talk about another black dude? Race is not where the line is drawn. It's God's side and the other side. And we don't care nothing about the other side. Period. All of these big dick deviants is all catching hell in 2024. It's up for all of them. It don't matter if you Diddy or whoever you is. TG Jakes, any of them. All lies will be exposed. That's all. And anyone who takes that the wrong way,
because
know why
suddenly
they take
his
it the wrong
warning
way.
felt
The
less
truth is-
abstract. Viewers started noticing that while one figure was put under a microscope, the wider ecosystem around him stayed largely untouched. And that's when people began asking a different kind of question, not who is guilty, but who is missing. And that's where the names start coming up. One of the first names people mention is Snoop Dogg. To be clear, no one is accusing Snoop of anything in this documentary. That's not the point. The reason his name keeps appearing in online conversations is proximity. Snoop and Diddy have existed in overlapping celebrity spaces for decades. Music collaborations, industry events, business circles, and long-standing relationships. When a documentary examines an era and its culture, viewers naturally expect long-term peers to at least be contextualized. So when Snoop barely appears, people ask why. Not because they think he did something wrong, but because omission creates curiosity. In gossip culture, absence can be as loud as presence. And this is where understanding documentaries as products matters. A Netflix documentary doesn't just tell a story, it survives legal review. Every name, every implication, every visual must be defensible. If something can't be backed up cleanly, it doesn't make the cut. That doesn't mean it's false, it means it's risky. And that same logic applies to another name viewers keep bringing up, Kevin Hart. Kevin's situation is different. His name trends not because of scandal, but because of how carefully he navigates industry conversations. Fans have noticed that whenever sensitive topics come up, Kevin responds with humor, distance, and tight control over his words. People interpret that as experience. Kevin Hart is a global brand. He understands how quickly comments can turn into headlines. And from a documentary standpoint, including someone of his stature without airtight information,
Thank you, come here. Don't sit on the bed at night. No homo. No, just don't get close to the bed. Don't get close, but it's just like, yo, we want to thank you for hosting the thing, man. It's been a pleasure. You didn't have to do it, and you did it.
No, I definitely didn't have to do it. I definitely didn't have to. First and foremost, I'm not getting in the bed. Shout out to him and what he did. I'm just gonna, if we can, let's just put the camera a little this way, just so we're not. I don't want my shot to even I don't want it to come close to the bed at all. Usher look like he fresh off a goddamn plane. I should.
Fresh off the guard stage. That's my brother right here from day one. We used to wake up and, pause, but like just back in the days when he was like 10 and I was a little bit older, his older brother, we used to fight over the Frosted Flakes. You know what I'm saying? Before pause was invented. You know what I'm saying? But it's my brother for real. We used to actually wrestle off of the Frosted Flakes because he used to always get up early with me. Now he's one of the richest stars in the world. And
what the did Puff just say? Nobody's gonna acknowledge this for me. Puff just said we used to wrestle over the Frosted Flakes, and we're streaming live. That was stupid. Listen, that was fucking stupid. Listen,
we having a good time, yo. Oh, your Usher made it in the. Hey, yo.
Fuck that mic. I'm a thug. At the end of the day, I killed.
Would be a legal and reputational gamble. So, when viewers say Kevin's name was handled lightly, it's not about favoritism. It's about liability. That's a theme that keeps repeating. This documentary doesn't avoid people because it likes them. It avoids people because it can't afford to fight them. And that brings us to Mase. This is where frustration really starts to show. Mase wasn't adjacent to the bad boy era. He was inside it. Music, contracts, inner circle dynamics. Fans know his history, especially his long-publicized contract struggles and how long it took for those issues to be resolved. What gets people talking isn't anything Mase has accused anyone of. It's how carefully he still speaks. Even years later, even with distance, his words are measured. That silence creates questions, not about guilt, but about pressure. Viewers expected a documentary like this to at least explore that silence. But doing so would shift the narrative from biography to business ethics, from storytelling to confrontation. And once you open that door, the documentary becomes something else entirely. Which brings us to Usher. Usher's name comes up in a much more sensitive way. Over the years, Usher has spoken publicly about being very young in adult industry spaces. He hasn't accused anyone. He hasn't named names. But he has acknowledged that early fame exposed him to environments he didn't fully understand at the time. That alone makes a mainstream documentary extremely cautious. Stories involving youth, power, and influence require a level of care that goes far beyond gossip. Without explicit consent and clear framing, including that material risks crossing from commentary into exploitation. That's why many viewers actually believe Usher's limited presence was intentional. Not to protect someone else, but to avoid reopening a chapter that doesn't belong to the audience. And finally, there's the name that carries the most weight, even though it's mentioned the least: Clive Davis. Clive isn't a celebrity in the way artists are, but in the music industry, he represents something bigger: infrastructure, long-term executive power, gatekeeping. When people online talk about systems instead of individuals, this is the type of figure they're referring to. A documentary can safely examine artists. It can cautiously examine moguls. But once it starts examining the structure behind the industry, the risk multiplies. Naming legacy executives turns a streaming release into a corporate battle. That doesn't mean anything illegal happened. It means the scope changes. And that's the real story here. This documentary didn't just tell a story. It revealed the boundaries of what can be told on a major platform. Katt Williams didn't say the truth wouldn't come out. He said it wouldn't come out evenly. And that's exactly what viewers feel they're watching. Some names are examined deeply. Some names are barely touched. And some names never appear at all. Not because of conspiracy, but because power decides where the story stops. By the time viewers finished the documentary, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a story about one man. It was a lesson in how stories get managed. Because when you zoom out, the pattern starts to reveal itself. This documentary didn't shy away from controversy. It wasn't afraid to explore uncomfortable themes. It showed moments that clearly made people uneasy, but it also drew invisible lines, lines that it wouldn't cross, no matter how curious the audience became. And that's where the conversation shifts from content to context. Because once you understand how the entertainment industry works, the omissions start to feel less mysterious and more strategic. Let's start with something basic. Documentaries on major platforms aren't just creative projects, they're legal products. Every name mentioned carries risk. Every implication has consequences. Every second of footage must survive review. And when you're dealing with people who have decades of influence, money, and legal resources, that risk multiplies quickly. That's why viewers keep coming back to the idea of legacy protection. Take Snoop Dogg again. Snoop isn't just an artist. He's a cultural institution. His image spans generations, genres, and business ventures. He's mainstream enough to host family-friendly content and respected enough to maintain street credibility. From a storytelling perspective, Snoop represents stability. Including him in a controversial documentary without a very specific, verified reason wouldn't just raise eyebrows, it would raise lawyers. So when viewers say Snoop was handled lightly, what they're really noticing is this: legacy figures don't get pulled into narratives unless the story requires it. And in this documentary, the story was clearly scoped. That same logic applies to Kevin Hart, but in a slightly different way. Kevin isn't just a comedian, he's a corporate brand. Films, endorsements, partnerships, and international reach. One misinterpreted sentence can ripple across multiple industries. Fans often say Kevin sounds like someone who knows exactly where the lines are. He jokes, but he redirects. He acknowledges, but he doesn't expand. And that's not accidental. That's media literacy. So from a documentary standpoint, Kevin Hart represents something producers avoid unless absolutely necessary: unpredictable blowback. Not because he's guilty of anything, but because controversy attached to a brand that large becomes unmanageable. And this is where viewers begin to understand something important. This documentary wasn't trying to expose everyone, it was trying to survive. Now let's talk about Mase, because this is where the story feels emotionally heavier. Mase isn't just a name, he's a symbol of an era. When fans talk about Mase, they're not asking for scandal, they're asking for context. They want to understand what it was like inside the bad boy system from someone who lived it daily. And what frustrates people is that Mase's silence feels intentional. Over the years, he's spoken about business struggles, contract delays, and creative frustration, but always carefully, always measured. Viewers interpret that caution as evidence of pressure. Not pressure today, pressure then. Including Mase in a documentary like this wouldn't just add a chapter. It would raise questions about how artists were treated, how contracts worked, and how power was exercised behind closed doors. That's not gossip, that's business history. And business history gets dangerous when it challenges the narrative of success. That's why many viewers believe Mase's absence wasn't about avoiding controversy. It was about avoiding complexity. Because once you bring Mase in, the story becomes less about individuals and more about systems. And systems don't like to be questioned. Now let's revisit Usher, because this is where ethics come into play. Usher's name enters this conversation not because of wrongdoing, but because of vulnerability. He's spoken publicly about being very young in adult environments. He's acknowledged that early fame came with exposure he didn't fully understand at the time. Those statements alone require sensitivity. A documentary that includes Usher's early experiences would have to answer difficult questions, not just about the industry, but about responsibility, protection, and hindsight. And without Usher's direct participation and consent, including that material risks turning reflection into spectacle. That's why many viewers actually believe leaving Usher mostly out was a moral decision, not a strategic one. Not every story needs to be told, especially when it involves youth and power. That brings us back to the central tension of this documentary. Where do you draw the line between truth and harm? Between exposure and exploitation? Between curiosity and responsibility? And this is where the final name, Clive Davis, looms quietly over the entire conversation. Clive isn't part of pop culture discourse in the same way artists are, but in the industry, he represents continuity, decades of influence, label leadership, career-making decisions. When people online mention Clive, they're not pointing fingers. They're pointing upward. They're asking whether focusing on individuals misses the bigger picture. Because artists operate within systems, moguls operate within systems, and executives shape systems. But once a documentary shifts its lens to that level, it stops being entertainment and starts being institutional critique. That's where projects get stalled. That's where legal teams intervene. That's where distribution gets complicated. So viewers aren't shocked that Clive wasn't explored deeply. They're just noticing that the story stopped exactly where the power became structural instead of personal. And that's the key takeaway from all of this. This documentary didn't lie. It didn't fabricate. It didn't invent narratives. But it did choose a boundary. And that boundary reveals more than people realize. It shows us where mainstream platforms feel safe. It shows us which conversations are acceptable. And it shows us how influence quietly shapes storytelling. Katt Williams didn't say everyone would be named. He said the truth would be uneven. And that's exactly what viewers feel. Not because of conspiracy, but because of experience. People know how power works. They know how brands get protected. They know how stories get edited. And when they watch something that claims to go deep but stops at a familiar line, they feel it. In the next section, we're going to pull all of this together. We'll talk about why this conversation matters beyond one documentary, how audience awareness has changed, and why people are no longer satisfied with surface-level explanations. Because the real story isn't who was included, it's why people are no longer surprised by who wasn't. When the documentary ends and the credits roll, what stays with viewers isn't just the footage they saw. It's the feeling that the story stopped before it fully unfolded. Not because it was dishonest, not because it was poorly made, but because it clearly had boundaries. And those boundaries are the real takeaway. This documentary did what many mainstream projects do. It told a focused story within the limits of what could be legally defended, publicly framed, and safely distributed. It explored uncomfortable topics, but it also avoided turning into something that could spiral beyond control. That doesn't make it weak, it makes it revealing. Because once you recognize where the story stops, you start to understand how media power actually works. Documentaries aren't just about truth, they're about access. They're about permissions. They're about what can be shown without triggering legal battles, brand fallout, or institutional pushback. And that's why so many viewers walked away with mixed feelings. They learned a lot, but they also sensed restraint. They noticed that some threads were pulled hard, while others were barely touched. Some questions were explored deeply, while others were left hanging. And that contrast sparked conversation, not outrage, curiosity. People aren't demanding chaos, they're asking for context. They want to understand why certain narratives are spotlighted while others remain in the background, why some figures become symbols of accountability, while broader systems stay mostly invisible. And that's a fair question. What this documentary ultimately shows is that storytelling at this level is never neutral. It's shaped by power, risk, and responsibility. Every choice, from what footage is used to which names are spoken, reflects those pressures. That doesn't mean the story is false, it means it's incomplete by design. And maybe that's the most honest thing about it, because no single documentary can fully capture decades of industry culture, influence, and complexity. It can only offer a window, not the entire building. The real impact of this documentary isn't the answers it gave, it's the conversations it started. People are paying closer attention. They're asking better questions. They're noticing patterns they might have ignored before. And in that sense, the documentary succeeded. Even if not in the way everyone expected, It reminded viewers that truth in entertainment often comes in layers. Some are visible, some are protected, and some only surface when audiences are willing to look beyond the screen. At the end of the day, this isn't about choosing sides. It's about understanding how stories are told and why some parts are always quieter than others. And once you see that, you don't watch documentaries the same way again. This is I Love Gossip, where we don't just follow the story, we follow the story behind the story. If this breakdown added perspective, like the video, share it, and subscribe for more conversations that go deeper than the headlines.